I never thought I'd see the day when I'd drive down Maple Ridge Road and find my family's farm unrecognizable. The gravel beneath my tires felt wrong, like it was trying to warn me, but I couldn't place it until I rounded the final bend. What should have been a familiar sight, golden fields of wheat swaying in the wind, was gone. Instead, a massive concrete hotel towered over the land where my family had lived and worked for generations. Its glass windows glinted like 100 eyes staring back at me, cold and judgmental. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding. I stepped out of the car, feeling the earth beneath my boots as if it were some foreign terrain. The property had been in my family's hands for over 4 generations. Our home was our pride, our legacy, but now, it was nothing more than a parking lot for a monstrous construction project. My mind raced as I tried to process what was happening. I had just returned from a month-long business trip in Singapore, a critical consulting job my family desperately needed. Sarah and I had discussed everything before I left, every decision, every move, every detail. We'd even secured the farm, or so we thought. How could they have done this without any warning? Who was behind it? A construction worker noticed me standing there, staring at the monstrosity that now defiled our land. He approached, clipboard in hand, looking nervous. "Can I help you?" he asked. I steadied myself. "This is my family's land," I said, my voice firm despite the shock coursing through me. "I'm Richard Holloway." The worker shifted uncomfortably. "Oh, you're the owner," he said, unsure of how to proceed. Before I could say anything more, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to look to know it was Sarah. Her message was clear. "Richard, emergency. Call me ASAP." My eyes didn't leave the hotel. My mind screamed for answers. I took a few steps toward the construction entrance, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots sounding like a quiet betrayal of the earth I had known my entire life. That's when I saw it. A sign large and unapologetic saying Willowbrook Community Development, approved by HOA. My stomach dropped. Of course, Karen Reynolds. The name burned through my veins. She was the HOA president, the same woman who had relentlessly hounded us about our unkempt grass and overgrown boundaries for years. She had always seen our farm as an inconvenience, too loud, too rural, too much. I always knew she wanted something more from our land, but this was far worse than anything I had imagined. As I got closer, I noticed a stack of paperwork on a nearby table, a pile of construction permits, zoning documents, and approval stamps. I glanced over the pages quickly, desperate for any clue that might explain how this was happening. One document caught my attention. It was a notation about community improvement zones, and something about the language felt off. It wasn't illegal, maybe, but it certainly felt calculated. Someone had engineered this. Before I could dig deeper, the construction worker was back, now more insistent. "Sir, you can't be here," he said, but his tone was weak. I gave him a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'll be leaving soon," I replied. But as I turned to walk back to my car, I realized that leaving was no longer an option. This wasn't just about a piece of land anymore. It was about fighting back. It was about holding on to what was ours, and proving that we would not let this happen without a fight. As I sat in my car, I opened Sarah's message. I called her immediately, but the phone only buzzed with a long string of unanswered calls. Something wasn't right, and I knew I couldn't afford to sit idly by while this injustice unfolded. I needed to gather information, to understand what exactly had happened in my absence. But first, I had to return to the farm, my father's barn, the dusty file cabinet where I had kept every scrap of documentation, every legal form and map. It was time to get to work. The drive back to the farm felt like the longest one of my life. Each mile, I tried to piece together what had just happened, but nothing made sense. I had trusted everything would be the same when I returned. We'd secured the property, ensured everything was in order. Yet this monstrosity had appeared overnight like a shadow creeping across my life. The moment I pulled up to the barn, I didn't waste a second. The dusty file cabinet in the corner of the barn was my last hope. My grandfather had kept meticulous records, maps, legal documents, property deeds, everything necessary to protect our land. Everything that was supposed to safeguard my family's history. I had never imagined I'd need to use these old records in a fight like this, but now, they felt like the only weapon I had. I opened the drawer, the smell of old paper and aged wood hitting me. My fingers trembled slightly as I sifted through the papers. Every document had a history, a story behind it. There was no way the HOA, no matter how powerful, could take everything from us without facing consequences. I needed proof. As I dug deeper, I pulled out the first map, a hand-drawn property survey from 1952. The intricate pencil lines were still visible, despite the wear and tear. My grandfather had been a perfectionist, each corner of the farm mapped with precision. I could practically hear his voice in my head. "Knowledge is your best weapon." My grandfather had fought hard for this land during tough times. The battles hadn't always been easy, but he'd always been prepared. The documents were more than just papers. They were evidence of his foresight, his preparation for something like this. I spread the maps out on the workbench. As I traced the lines, it all started to make sense. The HOA wasn't just a group of well-meaning neighbors trying to improve their community. No, this had been planned for years. They had been chipping away at individual property rights, slowly taking land without anyone noticing, one house at a time. Karen Reynolds had been at the center of it all, quietly orchestrating this land grab. As I sifted through old meeting minutes, letters from the 1980s, and county records, I found something that made my blood run cold. A series of letters between the HOA and local developers, documents that seemed to indicate an illegal conspiracy to acquire land under false pretenses. They had been doing this for decades. And the worst part? They had succeeded until now. I pulled out my phone, my hand steady as I snapped photos of each document. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a case of bad politics or poor planning. This was a deliberate and calculated effort to take away people's homes and land. The thought of how far they'd gone to hide it made my stomach turn. As I gathered more evidence, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen knew this was coming. She'd always been a step ahead, always playing the game with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. But she had underestimated one thing: me. I wasn't just going to sit by while she tore apart everything my family had worked for. I had my grandfather's preparation, and I had something more: determination. I was going to fight back, and this time, I wouldn't be alone. The weight of what I had discovered hit me hard, but I couldn't afford to stop now. The legal battle that was ahead of me wasn't just about winning, it was about survival. Survival of my family's legacy, survival of everything my grandfather had fought for. The entire community was at stake, too. If Karen Reynolds and the HOA could do this to us, there was no telling how many other families they had manipulated, taken advantage of, or worse, driven out. I sat at the workbench, surrounded by maps and yellowed papers. Every document was a potential weapon. Every letter, every photo, every deed, each one could be the key to stopping Karen. I felt the weight of the task ahead of me, but I couldn't let that hold me back. I had to move fast. I had to be smart. The first step was clear. I needed to talk to Marcus, my lawyer. He was the one person I trusted to help me navigate this labyrinth of legalese. But I also knew that time was critical. The longer I waited, the more time Karen had to fortify her position. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking with urgency, and called Marcus. Marcus, the first said as soon as he picked up, "I need your help. I've got something huge. Something they didn't count on." "Slow down, Richard," Marcus replied, his voice steady and calm. "What's going on?" "I've got proof," I said, pushing the words out in a rush. "Karen Reynolds and the HOA have been running a scheme to steal people's land. And they've been doing it for years. They've been using illegal tactics, manipulating zoning laws, and selling land they have no right to. And now they've sold my family's farm." I heard a pause on the other end. Then Marcus spoke, his tone sharper now. "You've got evidence?" "Plenty," I said. "I've got maps, letters, old meeting minutes, everything that shows a pattern. I need you to help me make sense of it all." "I'm on my way," Marcus said, cutting the line. He was a professional, but he wasn't going to let this go. And that was exactly what I needed. While I waited for Marcus, the first went over the documents again. My mind was racing, trying to piece everything together. The more I read, the clearer it became. Karen and her cronies had been carefully executing this plan for years, manipulating local government officials, developers, and even unsuspecting community members into believing they were simply improving the neighborhood. But this wasn't about community, it was about power, control, profit. The first remembered the construction worker I had met earlier. He hadn't known much, but he had seemed uncomfortable, like he was caught between the truth and his job. I had no doubt that people like him were being used as pawns, forced to work on a project they didn't understand, or worse, that they had no idea was based on lies. That was the thing about people like Karen. They were good at hiding the truth, at making people look the other way. They thought they were untouchable. They thought that because they had the power, they had the right. But I knew better. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. When Marcus arrived, he immediately went to work. I handed him the documents I had gathered. He flipped through them quickly, his brow furrowing as he processed the information. "This is incredible," he said after a long silence. "I've seen cases like this before, but never on this scale. The thing is, Richard, you're not just fighting for your land here. You're fighting a system. This is going to take more than just legal action. This is going to take strategy." I nodded. He was right. We couldn't afford to make mistakes. The stakes were too high, and Karen had far more resources at her disposal. I couldn't just rely on legal loopholes. I needed to expose her in front of everyone. The community, the neighbors, if we could get them on our side. The HOA would be forced to act. But how could I convince people to stand up against someone like Karen? Someone they were probably scared of. I looked at Marcus. What do we need to do? First, we start by organizing all this information, he said. Then, we get in touch with some key players in the community. The ones who have been affected by the HOA's actions. The ones who have been too afraid to speak up. Once we have enough people, we'll build a public case. I didn't need any more convincing. I was all in. It was time to take the fight to Karen. The next few days were a blur of activity. Marcus and I met with a few key community members who had been similarly affected by the HOA's actions. It didn't take long for the stories to start pouring in. There were neighbors who had been forced out of their homes, others whose land had been slowly eroded by HOA policies. Some had already moved, sold out, but a few remained, still angry, still determined to hold on to what they had left. I met Martha Thompson, the longtime resident who had always seemed so reserved at the HOA meetings. She had been paying attention all these years, taking notes, and keeping her own quiet record of Karen's manipulations. I've been trying to fight back for years, she told me one afternoon over coffee. But no one would listen. They're all afraid of Karen. Not anymore, I replied, my voice firm with resolve. We have the evidence. We can prove it. With Martha's help, we organized a meeting of residents, those who still lived in the neighborhood, and those who had already moved out. We were going to take the fight directly to Karen. And this time, we weren't going to back down. The day of the meeting came, and the air in the room was thick with tension. The HOA board members were there, including Karen, sitting at the head of the table, wearing that same smug look she always did. I could see her trying to gauge the mood of the room, her eyes darting between the residents, searching for weakness. But there was none. I stepped forward, holding the stack of documents in my hands, and spread them across the table. The room went silent. I began to speak, each word carefully chosen. This is not just about my land, I said, looking directly at Karen. This is about all of us. About our rights. About what happens when people in power think they can take whatever they want, without consequence. Karen tried to interrupt, but I silenced her with a raised hand. The HOA has been manipulating zoning laws, stealing land, and forcing people out of their homes for years. And we've got the proof to back it up. I walked the room through the evidence, showing them the maps, the letters, and the internal HOA communications that Karen had worked so hard to hide. The more I spoke, the more I saw people's faces shift from disbelief to anger to determination. They weren't afraid anymore. By the time I was finished, the room was buzzing with energy. The community was awake, and they were ready to fight. The days following the meeting with the residents felt like an avalanche was coming. The first ripple of support had started, a few neighbors speaking out, others joining us in our cause. But the deeper we dug, the more I realized that this battle wasn't just about proving our rights. It was about dismantling an entire system that had been built on corruption, fear, and manipulation. The HOA wasn't just a group of people. It was a fortress, a shield of power that protected Karen Reynolds and her collaborators. And like any fortress, it needed to be breached piece by piece. I knew that our first step was to organize and present a united front. There were still a few holdouts, people too scared to stand up against Karen and the HOA's influence. But even they couldn't deny the mountain of evidence we were amassing. In the coming days, we set up meetings with more residents, gathering stories and documents, preparing for the inevitable showdown with Karen. Every interaction felt like a chess match. I'd walk into rooms full of people who were either too intimidated or too tired to fight. But every time I spoke, I could see the change, the flicker of recognition, the realization that they weren't alone. I made it my mission to show them that we had power, not the kind that came with wealth or authority, but the kind that came from truth, unity, and determination. Then, the unexpected happened. Marcus called me one evening, his voice sharp with urgency. "Richard, you need to see this," he said. "It's big. I don't think you'll believe it until you see it for yourself." "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Karen's dirty little secret," Marcus replied, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "I've been digging into the past, and I've uncovered something that could blow the whole thing wide open. There's a paper trail, Richard. A clear connection between Karen Reynolds and some of the biggest developers in the area." My pulse quickened. I had known Karen was corrupt, but the depth of her involvement, how far back it went, was something I hadn't anticipated. It was time to go on the offensive. I met Marcus at his office the next morning. He handed me a file, thick with documents and photos. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. There, in black and white, were the records I'd been waiting for, documents showing direct payments between Karen and local developers. Under-the-table deals that went back years. The kind of deals that violated every law protecting homeowners and landowners. "This is it," Marcus said, pointing to a particular set of documents. These were signed by Karen herself, approving zoning changes that directly benefited her and her friends. "If we present this to the right people, we can have her removed from office, and the HOA will lose all its credibility. This could be the end for her." I couldn't believe what I was holding in my hands. Every page revealed a deeper layer of deceit, a calculated conspiracy that Karen had built to secure her power. It was a blueprint for exploitation, a roadmap to understanding how she had systematically destroyed the lives of so many families. And now, it was time for her to face the consequences. But the moment I thought things were finally starting to fall into place, Karen made her move. It came on a Wednesday afternoon. The phone rang, and I answered, expecting a routine call. Instead, it was Sarah, her voice panicked. "Richard," she said, her voice trembling. "You need to come home, now." I didn't need any more prompting. I rushed back to the farm, my heart racing as I sped down the familiar roads. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw what I had feared, a large, black SUV with tinted windows parked near the entrance. Two men in dark suits stood by the gate, their expressions cold, calculating. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping out of the car. My mind was already running through the possibilities. Sarah was standing near the porch, looking shaken but resolute. "They're here on behalf of Karen Reynolds. They've got papers. They're trying to force us off the property." Richard. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a legal move. This was intimidation, an attempt to make us back down. One of the men, a lawyer from the looks of him, stepped forward, holding a thick stack of papers. "Mr. Holloway," he said, his tone condescending, "we've been authorized to inform you that the HOA has officially filed to seize your land for redevelopment. You'll need to vacate the premises immediately, or we'll have no choice but to escalate this to a court order." My heart pounded in my chest. It was happening. They were going to take everything from us, using the full weight of the law to crush us. "No," I said, my voice firm. "You're not taking anything. Not without a fight." The lawyer looked unfazed, as if he'd heard that response 100 times before. "You're making a mistake," he said. "This is already in motion. There's nothing you can do." I took a step forward, my anger bubbling over. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice low and steady. "You're not dealing with some farmer who doesn't know how to fight back. You're dealing with someone who's about to expose everything you've been hiding." The lawyer hesitated for just a second, his eyes flicking to his colleague. But it was enough. I saw doubt in their eyes. And I knew then that they weren't as certain as they pretended to be. "I'll see you in court," I said, turning to walk back toward the house. "And believe me, you don't want to be there." I didn't wait for them to respond. I walked inside, my mind racing with the possibilities. This was the moment. The HOA had crossed the line, and they were about to feel the full force of what we had uncovered. Later that evening, after the men left, I sat down with Sarah and Marcus. We had to move quickly now. The stakes had never been higher, but we were ready. "This is it," Marcus said, looking at the documents in front of him. "We have everything we need. Now we just need to go public. Once we do, Karen's going to lose her position, and the HOA will be forced to answer for their actions." I could feel the weight of what we were about to do. The lives of so many people hung in the balance. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't going to let Karen or anyone else push us around. I looked at Sarah, her eyes full of worry and determination. "We'll win this," I said, my voice steady. "We have the truth on our side." She nodded, her hand finding mine. "I know we will," she said. "We've come this far. We're not stopping now." The weeks following our discovery were a whirlwind of preparations. It felt like the calm before the storm. Everyday life seemed to carry on as normal. But I knew better. The battle we were facing was bigger than anything I had ever imagined. Every decision I made, every conversation I had with Marcus, Sarah, and the residents, felt like a move in a high-stakes game. And with Karen Reynolds pulling the strings, I knew that this would be a fight unlike any I'd ever encountered. We had the evidence now, a solid case against the HOA, and the public was starting to take notice. The community, once divided and unsure, was coming together. But Karen wasn't going to go down without a fight. I could feel the tension rising, the sense of urgency creeping up on us. The court date was looming, and I had no illusions about how difficult it would be to expose someone like her, someone who had already proven she would stop at nothing to maintain control. As we prepared, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was preparing her own counterattack. She'd already made moves to discredit us, using her connections to pressure some of the community leaders into siding with her. But it didn't matter. The truth was on our side. We had the documents, the photos, and the stories of the victims who had been silenced for far too long. The day of the court hearing arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. My stomach churned as I stood outside the courthouse, waiting for Sarah and Marcus. The weight of everything we had worked for over the past few months hung over me. It wasn't just our farm at stake anymore. It was the entire community. The system that had allowed Karen to thrive needed to be torn down, and I was the one who had to do it. Sarah came over and squeezed my hand, her expression calm but determined. "We're going to win this, Richard. You've done everything you can. Now, Let's make sure Karen and the HOA never do this again." Her words grounded me, and I nodded. She was right. We had done the work. We had the truth. It was time for the world to hear it. Marcus joined us a moment later, carrying a thick folder of documents. "Are we ready?" he asked, glancing over at the courthouse doors. I gave a tight smile. "As ready as we'll ever be." We walked inside, and the atmosphere shifted. The weight of the situation was palpable, like the very walls of the courtroom were watching us. We took our seats, and I noticed Karen sitting at the opposite table, flanked by her expensive lawyers. Her cold, calculating gaze met mine, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something, fear, doubt. She knew this battle wasn't going to be easy. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Judge Elizabeth Hartman had a reputation for being tough, no nonsense, and fair, exactly what we needed. She looked over the documents before her, her expression unreadable. The case was about to begin. As Marcus presented our case, laying out the evidence we had gathered over the past weeks, I could feel the tide starting to shift. The stack of documents on the table was more than just paper. It was the culmination of everything we had fought for. Every map, every letter, every email detailing Karen's corrupt practices. We weren't just fighting for land anymore. We were fighting for justice, for the community, for everyone who had been silenced by Karen's manipulations. I watched as Marcus broke down each piece of evidence, pointing to the glaring inconsistencies, the illegal zoning changes, and the backroom deals between Karen and local developers. The room was growing uneasy. The once confident lawyers representing Karen were beginning to falter. Every accusation was followed by a rebuttal, but each rebuttal felt weaker than the last. At one point, Karen's lawyer tried to challenge the authenticity of the documents, but Marcus was quick to shut it down. He had already anticipated this, and with the help of our expert witnesses, we were able to prove the legitimacy of everything we had. The documents spoke for themselves, and soon, Karen's defense was crumbling under the weight of the truth. As the court session wore on, the tension in the room was palpable. I could feel the eyes of the community on us. The witnesses we had called, people who had been hurt by the HOA's actions, spoke with conviction. Their testimonies were raw and real. And with every word, the case against Karen became clearer. It wasn't just about the land, it was about power. About how one person had abused their position to control and manipulate an entire community for personal gain. The turning point came during cross-examination. One of Karen's board members, a man I had always known to be one of her most loyal followers, took the stand, but something was off. As he spoke, I could see the cracks beginning to show. Marcus was methodical, pulling apart his testimony piece by piece. He pointed out the inconsistencies, the lies, and the moments where this board member had clearly been misled by Karen's promises. Finally, the board member faltered. He admitted, under oath, that Karen had not only manipulated the zoning laws but had also gone behind the backs of several residents, convincing them to sign agreements they didn't understand. He confessed that she had promised them money or other incentives in exchange for their silence. It was the breakthrough we needed. The courtroom went silent. I could see Karen's face ashen, her eyes wide with disbelief. The truth had been exposed. Her empire was crumbling, and there was no way out. Later that afternoon, the judge called for a recess. As I stepped outside the courtroom, I saw Sarah waiting for me, her face a mixture of relief and hope. "Richard," she said, pulling me into a tight embrace. "You did it. You really did it." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, but the fight wasn't over yet. We still had to finish this. We still had to win. But for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe it was possible. We had the truth on our side, and Karen had nothing left to hide. When we returned to the courtroom after the break, the atmosphere was different. The defense was scrambling. Karen's lawyers tried one last-ditch effort to sway the court, but it was too late. We had already won. The judge ruled in our favor, acknowledging the illegal actions of the HOA and ordering that the land be returned to its rightful owner, the Holloway family. Karen Reynolds was removed from her position as HOA president, and the board members who had supported her were forced to resign. The community, once divided, rallied together, and the system that had been manipulated for so long was dismantled. The weeks that followed were a blur of celebration and relief. The fight wasn't over, but the victory was sweet. We had reclaimed our land, and more importantly, we had exposed the corruption that had held the community hostage for so long. I stood on the porch of our farm one evening, looking out over the land. The fields were quiet now, no longer under the shadow of the hotel that had once threatened to erase everything. The land was ours again, and the future felt brighter than it had in years. Sarah stood next to me, her hand in mine. "We did it," she said, her voice soft but full of pride. "You fought for this, for our family, for our future." I nodded, taking in the peaceful scene before me. "It wasn't just me," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It was all of us, together. The fight had been hard, but it had been worth it." We had stood up for what was right, and in the end, truth and justice had prevailed.